ready for takeoff.
And hi, RubyConf. For those who don't know me, as of almost exactly a month ago, I'm the new executive director of Ruby Central. So it's fantastic to see so many people here. Thank you. But I'm not the main attraction here. I am here to introduce George. George M. Johnson is our keynote speaker for this morning. George is an award-winning black non-binary writer, author and activist located in the LA area. They have written for major outlets including Teen Vogue, Entertainment Tonight, NBC, The Root, Buzzfeed, Essence, and the Grio. And they have served as a guest editor for Bet.com's Pride Month. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce George, and they're going to be our keynote speaker this morning. So thank you very much, George.
Good morning, everyone. Y'all can do better than that. Come on now. Good morning, everyone. I'm the one who just traveled in. Like, y'all can do a little bit better than that. So my name is George M. Johnson. Born in a small city called Plainfield, New Jersey. That is my book, All Boys Aren't Blue, which is the second most banned book in the United States currently. So I'm very happy to be here to speak with you all today, just about the book, about my work, and about the importance of why we should be advocates for works and titles like mine. But the truth is, I'm tired. There has been no rest, but fortunately, I am from a group of people who have always persevered during the worst of times. So I continue to fight all of the book bans with all of my being, because even if you ban my book, you can never ban me. Story of my birth is a little bit interesting. It was Halloween 1985, and about 2 in the morning when I finally decided that I was ready to enter the world. As I began entering the world, a head full of hair appeared at the crown, and my Aunt Sarah ran out of the room and ran to where my family was and said, "Oh my God, it's a girl, it's a girl." 10 minutes later, she came back into the room, and I was fully into the world, and she realized the mistake that she had made. So then she had to run back out to my family and tell everybody, actually, it's a boy. But I always tell that story about my interest into the world because that is pretty much what my life has been like. Am I a boy? Am I a girl? As of today, I identify as non-binary, but that is the premise of what was the catalyst for me to write the book, All Boys Aren't Blue. All Boys Aren't Blue is my journey from birth until the age of 21, and I talk about what it felt like to go through life having an identity crisis while also living at the intersection of being black and being queer. By 2 years old, my mother and my grandmother already knew that I was going to be queer. My grandmother called my mother into a room one day, and as simply as Nanny could put it, she said, "I think we have another one." That another one meant that, one, my family had dealt with this situation of having queer people in it before, and two, they already knew that they were going to have to set up parameters and certain things in my life to make sure that I had the same love, the same respect, but also protection as I navigated the world. By the age of 5, I knew I was different. And so it's very interesting when I watch conversations online about how us as queer people or LGBT people are grooming kids or forcing how we live our lives onto children, when the reality is, at the age of 5, I already knew I was different. I just didn't have the language to know what different meant. And so I always tell that story, or part of that story, because children know who they are very, very early on. And the thing that ends up happening is society dictates to us how we are supposed to mold and shape children rather than how we're supposed to nurture and let the natural person that they are grow into who they're becoming. By the age of 10, everybody else knew I was different. But they also had the language to know that I was different, and that was the first time that I was called the F word. While playing on a playground at the age of 10 years old, I used to like double dutching. I don't know if you know what double dutching is, but it is jumping in between two ropes, typically a game played by girls that someone like me was not supposed to play. But I was good at it and I liked it. As I was double dutching, one of my friends came up to the top of the hill, and I remember he stated to me, "Hey, the guys down at the bottom of the hill are talking about you." And I was like, talking about me, like, how? And he was like, "They're calling you the F word because you're double dutching, and boys aren't supposed to double dutch. Like, boys are supposed to play football." And so by the age of 10, that was the first time that I realized that I was going to have to, as a 10-year-old, start to think about my safety. And so again, oftentimes we think that the conversations that we are having are too heavy for children or too heavy for teenagers or too heavy for people in general, when realistically, as a child, I was already processing very, very heavy things. And so that was the day that I chose safety over happiness. And I went down on the football field and I started to play football. Gratefully, I had grew up with some pretty rough cousins who had already taught me how to play football. So when I went out there, I was actually pretty good at it. And that was the first time that, again, it stopped the whispers, it stopped the talking, it stopped all of the people making fun of me. But it didn't stop the fact that I was going to have to navigate a society that still was not ready for the existence of a person like me. By the time I got to high school, things were really, really tough. I then had the language, I knew exactly who I was, but I knew that I could not navigate the world as I was, out of fear, out of danger. Nowadays it's interesting when we look at how visible queer people have become, but I went to high school in '99, and I went to Catholic school, so that was just not an option for me back then. But by the time I got to college, which I also talk about in the book, that was when I realized who I was, who I wanted to be, and how I wanted to navigate the world. When I think about this book and what it's done in the world, the fact that it's been banned in over 30 different states and more than about 40 school districts, this is what sometimes has to happen in order for culture to shift or culture to change. A lot of people are wondering, like, why now? Why all of a sudden are they trying to ban books? And the reality is that the United States is starting to change. Generation Z is the first generation where it is 51% white and 49% non-white. That is the closest that any generation in the United States, in the history of the United States, has come to becoming non-white, more non-white people existing than white people within a generation. Generation Z also is currently identifying at 20% of them identifying as LGBTQ, which is also the highest percentage of any generation identifying in that way. And so when we look at the state of the United States and where we are now, the book bans are not happening in isolation. And so the book bans are tied to Roe v. Wade. The book bans are tied to Don't Say Gay bills. The book bans are tied to anti-transgender legislation. They all speak to each other. The issue in this country right now is that many people think that white people are not having enough children. And there is a real growing fear that the minority population will become the majority population. Because of that growing fear, we are watching them try to take curriculum out of school systems that will teach Generation Z about the actual world that they live in versus the world that we have always been taught. Even within the book, I talk about how I had the lead role in a school play in the 3rd grade. That lead role was Abraham Lincoln. I do not look like Abraham Lincoln. There is no reason that me, as a black kid, should be playing Abraham Lincoln. But what it really was speaking to was the fact that even as children, we're indoctrinated with American culture in a way that is ahistorical. And so I was taught that Abraham Lincoln was pretty much my savior, neck and neck with Martin Luther King. I was taught by teachers who said, he freed the slaves. Like, that's the reason that, you get to sit next to other kids who don't look like you in class. When the reality of it was, that's just not the case. It just wasn't the truth. But that indoctrination lived with me for many, many years until I was able to unlearn that and then put in a book what actually was happening for the current generation of teenagers to know how they have to navigate this world. Because of that, that is also why I oftentimes have issues with the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion. I always laugh at the inclusion part because it's like, why do I need inclusion in something I'm already in? I am already in the world. I'm already in this room. I am already in this space. And they're like, oh yeah, we want to include you. And it's like, but I'm already here. So what are we really saying when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion for a space that I am already in? So I always like to say what we need to do moving forward is acknowledgement. People already exist in many of the spaces that we occupy. For instance, I am a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. And oftentimes, they're saying like, well, how do we be better towards our gay members? How do we be better towards, the effeminate men that are within our organization? And then once a conversation came up like, well, what do we do about transgender men? Like, do we accept them? Do we allow them to join our organization? And I remember I stood up at the meeting and I said, well, you can't allow them to join something they already exist in. And everybody's face dropped. I said, there are already transgender men within the organization. So the problem is not that we need to find some way to include people. The problem is oftentimes we need to find a way to acknowledge people who already exist within the spaces that we occupy. When I think about, diversity, my book is at the forefront of my mind because that's realistically what we were trying to do. We were trying to diversify curriculum. But we see what happens when we try to diversify curriculum. I grew up having to read terrible books like Catcher in the Rye, like, what's the other one? Little Women, The Invisible Man, The Glass Menagerie. And the sad thing about it is there are still teenagers today reading those same terrible books. And I am going to call them terrible because they are terrible. But they are deemed American classics. And what we are trying to do now is put curriculum in school systems where the books actually mirror the students. The books actually mirror the parents. The books mirror who actually exists in the world so that kids who have to exist with kids that don't look like them can actually learn what the lived experience is of kids that don't look like them. And that's important because one thing we all often fail to realize is the teenagers of today become the CEOs of tomorrow. The teenagers of today become the executive directors of tomorrow. They become the presidents of the United States. They become the senators. They become the governors. They become people who are in the House of Representatives. And so we oftentimes live in this bubble where, as adults, we think about self and our own self-interest, not realizing that part of the work that we need to do is assisting and helping those who are coming up after us, and ensuring that we're putting things in place that not only help us, but also help that generation that's coming up after us. Unfortunately, I have had multiple criminal complaints filed against me simply for writing a book, simply for telling my story. The saddest part about it is we live in a country where this is becoming the norm and not the exception. And so I can only hope that rooms like these where I'm allowed to speak to individuals, that I say something or that I do something that makes someone go out in the world and help somebody else who is a little bit different than them. Read the story about someone who may not come from the same background or the same lived experience as them. Oftentimes, I read about other people to learn about other people, to learn about other cultures, to learn how they have to navigate this world. Unfortunately, I was forced to only read about one culture, how one culture had to navigate this world. And so the work that I do now is to put books like this into the world and to put stories like mine into the world so that we can all learn how we have to navigate spaces in rooms together, how we have to, again, come together if we're going to move forward as a community and as a society. The book bans, unfortunately, are not going anywhere, so I'm going to continue to fight tooth and nail against, at this point, fascism, to ensure that this type of literature continues to exist in the world. Once again, my name is George M. Johnson. I am the author of the second most banned book in the United States. And is there any questions? He asked were there any concrete actions that you all could take when it comes to this, and yes. So in the state of Texas, I believe they have banned 850 of our books. There is also a county in Texas where a woman refused to remove my book from the library, and so they shut down the entire library, simply because she would not take my book out of the e-library section, so they just decided they're going to take the whole library away, and that's what they did. So how do we fight against this? Part of what is happening is that our books are being categorized as something that they are not. And so the first thing that needs to happen is, one, we need people to actually read the entire book. So there are 4 passages in my book, page 266, page 268, and page 270, where I talk about the first time that I had sex. I was 20 years old, though. Now, is my book a young adult book? Yes. Is it important that teen readers learn about sex? Yes. There is a notion in this country that sex is too heavy a topic for teenagers who are already engaged in sex. And so we don't want to teach it to them in schools, and then we get nervous to talk about it at home, and then we put them out in the world at the age of 18, and we put them on college campuses, and then all sit back and wonder, well, why is the rate of sexual assault so high on colleges? But we taught them nothing when we sent them into the world. And so that's the part of my book that is getting the most heat, because it teaches about consent and it teaches about agency. So the important thing is, when you read books that are being banned, make sure you're talking about what the book is actually saying. Like, putting a graphic paragraph out into the world with no context is basically what they're doing. But if you actually read the book, it's really talking about consent, it's talking about agency, it's talking about how to say no, it's talking about the mistakes I made so that future teenagers don't have to make those mistakes. And even adults, because a lot of times adults don't know that they are being put into situations and put into places where they can say no. A lot of times, I've seen adults who have read some of the passages of my book and then realized that they actually have been sexually assaulted and didn't consider it that because it didn't look like Law & Order SVU. Right? Because we have, in America, warped our minds to think, well, somebody has to break in and someone has to do certain things or abuse you or harm you in a way for it to be considered this, when realistically that's not it at all. Many people in this room have probably been sexually assaulted and have never been able to name that thing, even though they carry that trauma with them. And so that's what this book is teaching. And so what happens is, when you read the book, make sure that you're putting out into the world what the book is actually saying. If you see nefarious things being said about these books, and then you read the book and realize that's not what it is, then it becomes our duty to make sure that we're putting the right language out into the world about, number one, what the book is actually saying, and number two, why these books are so important to the curriculum and to the teenagers and adults who need to have them. No problem. I'm like, what is rest? Resting? Oh my God, I was just in Miami yesterday. Resting. I barely made it here. No. You know, that's interesting, rest, self-care. It is something I talk about a lot, though. And I think it's important that we talk about rest and self-care, burnout. I don't know, like, one thing I do know is that organizations need to switch to where they have built-in mental health days. It is something that I created when I used to be the CFO of a multi-million-dollar nonprofit in Washington, D.C. We had days that were called mental health days. And you literally could just call and say, hey, I need a mental health day. No questions, no doctor's note, nothing. I think that is something that we all should think about implementing, though, because it's hard to be Black and queer, watch 11 people be killed, 23 people be injured at a nightclub, that's my safe space, or supposed to be my safe space, and supposed to wake up on Monday morning and go to work. And nobody thinks about it from that lens. Nobody thought about the day after George Floyd was killed that black people still had to wake up and go to work and then be questioned. How are you feeling? Are you okay? Oh my God, I know it's so much going on. And then we have to put on the smile that, oh yeah, I'm good. Yeah, yesterday was rough. Yesterday was tough when realistically we're grieving. I think, but that's part of the problem, in America is like, your mother could die and they give you 3 days of bereavement. What does that mean? My brother died this year, my brother who I talk about in the book. My older brother actually passed away in July. And I remember I went right back to work. Like within 4 days, I went right back to work. And it was the worst decision I had ever made in my career. Because I just thought I could steamroll through it, and I couldn't. And so one of the things I have learned from that is like that there are pockets where I can take rest. And so during those pockets, I take that rest. But something that I also preach is when you wake up in the morning, the first person that you should take time out for is yourself. So don't look at your phone, don't look at what emails you've missed, don't look at what texts you missed overnight, but actually do something for yourself, even if it's just a walk around a corner, even if it's just a cup of coffee. For me, this mic is bothering me. For me, I have an altar, spelled A-L-T-A-R, where I have pictures of my deceased relatives that I sit at and I meditate to in the morning. And so that, for me, at least lets me know that I will give myself 10 to 15 minutes of just myself before I have to give myself to the world. Other projects I'm working on, I have a book coming out about the Harlem Renaissance in 2024. The paperback edition of my second book will be released January 3rd. The Korean edition of All Boys Aren't Blue came out today. Which is pretty cool because, I never thought my little Black American story would have worldwide appeal, but now it is in France. It's in French, it's in Spanish, it's in Portuguese, and as of today, it is in Korean. And I'm also working on developing this into a television series with Grio Union. So, yeah.
I had like a two-part question. So teaching in general is hard. So this is a question from like a parent's point of view. Like how do you go about like explaining your book, or like it should be in parts, you can't just like dump the whole thing together. How do you go about it? And then once they have that knowledge and they are out in the school, and if their surroundings are not accepting those concepts or accepting those social, how do you help them maneuver those things and don't feel like outsider? It's more about like you want to help and support those things, but then your environment may not be able to conducive for those things. So how would you suggest a parent, to help their kid maneuver these things?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So it's a good question and a tough one, right? Because you can have a lot of love in your home. And like I was loved at home, even though I was very effeminate and very different, and my cousins hated it. I was very loved at home. But when I went out into the world, when I went out into society, my parents couldn't protect me from those things that were happening at school, the names I was being called, how I would be treated in society. And so what I always say to parents, one is to actually listen to your child. Like a lot of times, like we don't allow the space for children to speak. And children actually don't operate in right or wrong. If you notice, children operate in what's fair and what's not fair, which is very different. And so that's why you'll hear kids say, when you say something to them, they're like, well, that's not fair. Because it's not about a right or a wrong a lot of times with kids, because they don't really learn that until you get much older about the difference in right and wrong. What they operate in is like, well, that's not fair. If she can play with a doll, why can't I? Right? Because that's not about a right or a wrong. That's about fairness. And so I think one thing is, as parents and just as guardians of whomever, we have to start operating from a place of not thinking of everything as black and white, not thinking of everything as binary. Sometimes things are just a matter of gray, and sometimes things are a matter of fair and not fair. And we have to be able to check ourselves to be like, maybe that isn't fair. Like, why can't you have an easy bake oven, right? And I always find that funny because it's like, we'll say boys shouldn't have easy bake ovens, but then when you look at the landscape of the industry of cooking, most of your top chefs are men. And so at what point does it switch that being a male chef is okay, right? And so I think that's like one of those things that have to be deconstructed in the household is like, again, we'll tell a child, well, no, a boy, like, no, you can't, you shouldn't be baking, you shouldn't be cooking. But at a certain age, if they're a baker or a cook, that becomes like a real thing, right? I see male chefs all the time on TV making all kind of money. Dominating the industry, right? Even though we look at cooking, quote unquote, as a effeminate trait or a feminine trait, right? And so I think that's part of where it starts is like, how do we deconstruct those type of norms and values in the home first? And then again, like you said, we then send them out into the world. What I will say is like, I work with a lot of teachers, I work with a lot of librarians, I work with a lot of people who are actually in classroom settings, I work with a lot of therapists also. And so oftentimes, you know, it is rough for a teen who is LGBTQ or different to kind of navigate space. But the beautiful thing is that this generation has created GSAs, like alliances with gay students. I have watched, I think it was in Florida, where like 5,000 students walked out of school because of the Don't Say Gay bill. And I mean, it was mainly heterosexual students supporting their friends. And so I will say that I always say, I'm like, the kids are all right. They get it. Like, they are really something fired up and like amazing to look at. A lot of times it's the adults that are not all right. And which is why I'm always glad to speak to these type of rooms, because it's usually not them, it's mainly us who have been like indoctrinated with the ways that things are. And like we take in like, well, this is just how it is, this is how it's always been, this is how it's gonna be. And this new generation is like, absolutely not. Like, why does this make sense to y'all? This doesn't make any sense, and we're not gonna like live this way. And so, like I said, the biggest thing you can do, especially like when you're trying to help somebody, is to listen, like actually listen. Because they'll tell you, I talk with teens all the time. They will tell you what they're going through. They will tell you what their life looks like. They will tell you the existence of what their day-to-day looks like. And a lot of times they shock me because they are way more equipped and way more transparent and vulnerable than I ever was or ever felt I could be. But yeah, oftentimes we just need to listen to them and let them take an active role in the life that they want to live.
As an activist, do you have ways that you measure or assess your personal impact and strategies? And then on the whole, are you tending towards optimism that there will be significant progress or change in the next decade or so?
Can I measure my impact? You know, that's an interesting question. Like, when I wrote this book, I wrote it for teenagers, right? And I was like, I wrote it based off the Toni Morrison quote, if there's a book you want to read and it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. This is the book I always wish I had to read. And so I wrote it and put it in the world. And I think the thing that shocked me the most around like who the impact was felt upon was, yes, it helped a lot of teenagers, but it actually helped a lot of senior citizens. And so I actually did my favorite Zoom chat that I did, or book chat that I did. It was with 33 people who were over the age of 60, who had read the book, and many of them were queer, and said that this was the first time they had ever felt seen in a book. And it was a really bittersweet moment because I'm like, how did you go this long in life without ever being seen in a book? And it's like, I know you don't feel seen on television because we haven't even broke that barrier in many ways yet. So it's like you really went through life not reading about anything or anyone or feeling anything that looked like you. And so that's pretty much how I've been able to measure the impact. I mean, I think also like the book being extremely banned also talks about the impact. So I'm just like, it's impactful in two ways, you know, but as an activist, what was the second part of the question? Oh, optimism in this country? Okay. My optimism levels, well, no. What I will say, what I will say is this. I enjoy the word hope, but I think that a lot of things in this country, specifically things that like inventions, movements, any type of like real significant change in this country, I don't think it actually came out of hope. I think it came out of hopelessness. And so I'm never afraid to feel hopeless. And so there are moments that I don't feel optimistic, and there are moments where I feel hopeless, but more often than not, when I get to a space where I feel hopeless or I have like this hopelessness occur, it usually is the thing or the catalyst for me to go and create something or for me to go and do something. There's a saying that black folks say, like, you know, we made a way out of no way. And it's like, it's very simple to just say like, oh yeah, we made a way out of no way. But it's like, to realize that you got to a place where you thought you had no way and you still made a way, right? That, to me, speaks to hopelessness. And I think hopelessness has been, like I said, one of the biggest drivers and catalysts in this country. And so I always implore on people, like, we don't always have to walk around with a smile on our face, and we don't always have to walk around being optimistic when we're looking at what the world looks like. You know, I am doing this in Texas, where I've had to have book events in Texas with armed security because of how dangerous the book bans have gotten, right? So I'm not gonna always pretend like I'm walking in a room just optimistic that somebody not gonna bust in and try and shoot me. And that's scary and it's sad over a book, but that's just the reality we live in. However, that hopelessness pushes me to create more content. It pushes me to show up in these rooms still. It pushes me to continue to speak and continue to do the work that I do. And so, yeah, I have moments of optimism, but I also am not afraid to operate from a place of hopelessness.
Hi.
Oh, good morning.
I loved what you were saying about inclusion. I thought that was a really interesting, I liked your perspective on it. And I think in this community and in technology in general, we have lots of conversations about DEI and how we can, you know, change the diversity of the people that are making technology needs to be more representative of the people that are using it.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I am interested in hearing kind of two things. How can we celebrate the folks that are in this room that are doing that work, but also open the doors so that we can continue to make those changes?
I love that. Yeah, because I'm like, I don't know if anybody understands the technology of them automatic sinks. But for the love of God, like, could they please recognize black hands? Like, when I read about that, like, that was like that there is a bias built into the system just to wash our hands with the automatic, and it doesn't recognize if your skin is black, which is why we all, I don't know, I mean, I've struggled literally to wash my hands in those damn automatic sinks. And it wasn't until like I went and read like some articles about the tech used behind the sinks that it's like, because it wasn't, again, because they didn't use a diverse enough population when they were creating them, they didn't realize that it didn't recognize different skin textures, right? And that's something that you think is like, that's simple, right? But it's like, that's what happens, right? The biases are being built into tech because the people who are making the technology are already biased. And they don't think about the worldview. They don't think about people that don't look like them who have to use this same technology. And so what I often say is like, again, this is why I have a problem with diversity, equity, and inclusion, because a lot of times like diversity to people means like, well, we need a certain percentage of these people, we need a certain percentage of these people, a certain percentage of these people to balance it out. And it's like, what does that have to do with talent? What does that have to do with like people who actually do the job well? Like this whole like we have to hit a quota type of notion to it, right? Yet and still we have watched some of the greatest inventors in the history of not just this country or this world be people of color, be black people. So there's clearly a huge disconnect in like these people who have always been able to, or people like myself who have always been able to create and been able to invent some of the greatest technology in this world, and then the tech companies who are not, for some reason, hiring those people. And so, it's one of those tough things around, like, do we hire people of color because we need to hit a quota, or are we actually hiring people because they're good at their jobs and because they can do the work? And I think we need to lean more into, one, just looking at the makeup of tech companies and organizations. Two, calling out the bias, right? Like, I think that's another issue, is that there's this real fear of actually naming the thing. And so I think one of the cool things was, before I came here, like, they sent me the makeup of RubyConf, like, percentage-wise of who would be in the room. I thought that was pretty cool, right? Like, because it let me know, one, like, okay, it gives me insight into the diversity of this room and what it's going to be. But two, if there was some jarring number, it would have given me insight to call out the jarring number. So I appreciated that. But I think most organizations and companies, they don't do that type of work, like the breakdown of the makeup of who actually exists within the organization. And I think that's one thing that tech companies and companies in general just need to do a better job at, is actually sharing what the makeup of their organizations are, what the breakdown of their organizations are, who is in leadership positions versus who are working non-leadership positions, because that also becomes very interesting when you look at the numbers around people of color in leadership roles. So yeah, I don't think it's like a problem that can be fixed overnight, but I think it takes someone who understands that there is a bias, who actually has power in that room to call out the bias, to take the first steps in actually changing it. Because again, I just want to be able to wash my hands.
Thank you very much for coming and speaking. And yeah, it's like DEI just keeps on coming up. And I don't know if you're aware of this. A very prominent leader in our community recently made a very public post on DEI and came to some similar conclusions in not liking it, but for not necessarily the right reasons.
Right.
You could, infer from that. Mm-hmm. And we've talked a lot about kind of changing ourselves and maybe changing those around us. Do you have any insights for when the people who we would like to see change might have power over us? Potentially a leader, potentially a parent, a family member, or just someone that we, I also live in Texas, so someone we can't necessarily just walk away from.
Right.
But I don't know. Can you speak to me?
Yeah, honestly, like, if you've watched what's happening in the country right now, there is strength in numbers. And I think, like, when you look at what's happening in California, where 48,000 grad student workers walked off the job, like, all at the same time, like, enough is enough. Like, the cost of living is way too high, and we are not making enough as graduate workers to even afford the cost of living as grad students, and all 48,000 walked off the job. So now somebody's going to have to do something about it, right? Even if you look at the situation with the Bird app, it's become a mess, but also, there's like a fear, like, oh, what happens if it goes away? And it's like, we've seen how this kind of thing plays out, and Congress has already started to make inklings that, like, this app is not going anywhere, because if this continues to be chaotic, us as a group of people that run this country will take the app over, right? So again, strength in numbers. I think that's pretty much like the route that has worked best, is when you build a coalition against a thing, it removes the power of an individual that may, be above you. And I think we're with the great, I forgot what they call it, not the Great Migration, the Great, Resignation, thank you. I was like, the fact that everybody quitting their jobs. With the Great Resignation, right? That was like it's a mobilization of just like people being tired, right? Like the fact that for decades in this country, people were told that you could not work from home. And then something forced everybody to work from home and the country still operated. And it was like the biggest lie that had been told for decades in this country to just simply keep us in an office for no real reason. And the bubble burst. And when people realized that, they were like, there's no way I'm going back into the office, right? Like, why would I do that now? When we have proven that we can still navigate and you can rest differently, when you work from home. Like, it's harder at times, but you can build your life around the fact that you don't have to go into an office, right? But that was a group-led effort. That's a coalition, right, that happened. And now the country is having to make changes to the way that we work, where even in the state of California, they're getting pretty close to making the work week 4 days, right? And that all came out of the Great Resignation because people were like, listen, this 5-day work week, 2 days off makes no sense. We're one of the only countries that does that. And so now a huge group of people are like, we're tired. Like, we cannot keep operating like this. And now the country is having to shift even how we work. And so I think that's the best method. Is the most change has always happened when it was a group that decided that the change needed to happen. So not trying to take on things as an individual, but trying to take on things as a group who feels that way, it usually works the best. Yep.
So I wanted to definitely say thank you for coming here, and I wanted to tell the RubyConf organization that I appreciate them for bringing you here. I definitely saw a lot of myself in you, and that makes me feel good in this type of space, seeing that. I read you were an HBCU grad. I'm a fellow HBCU grad at Tuskegee University.
Okay.
And AFI. We'll talk a little bit later about that. But I was just curious if you could just tell us about a quick version of like your career path, the what got you to being an author and an activist, and kind of what led to where you are now.
Yeah, my career path. What a mess. I pay a lot of money every month for 2 degrees I don't use. So let's get into it. Originally, and this is also a lesson too, like, that I teach teenagers now. It's like, don't go into something that you're good at. Go into something you're passionate about. I went into a field that I was good at. I was always good at numbers. I was always good at math. I am still good at numbers. I am still good at math. I can still do a balance sheet. I can still set up a payroll system with my eyes closed. I can do all of those things because I was good at it, but I was not passionate about it. So my first degree from Virginia Union University, HBCU in the South, is in finance. And then I went to Bowie State University and got a master's degree in human resource development. So my early career was in banking, was in insurance. I then switched over into higher education, where I was a director of student accounts for Virginia Union. So helping kids get into college, finding them money, finding them resources to make sure they could stay in college. I then worked at Georgetown University, again, in the financial offices, doing my finance thing. And then one day I got burnt out and I was tired and I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, this is boring. And I did an entire career change. I had been diagnosed with HIV in 2010. And so by 2013, I was starting to come to terms with it and come to terms with the life I was going to live as a person living with HIV, and started to do research and couldn't find anything. I could not find anything about what it was like to be Black and living with HIV in your 20s. Like, it just was nothing out there. And so that was when I decided I was going to start writing about it. And that's literally what became the catalyst for me to just start writing. Writing was something I was always good at. Writing was something I actually was very passionate about. But in this country, when you have a kid who is too talkative, instead of pushing them into journalism, we tell them to shut up. And that is what I think one of the biggest things that we make mistakes on, is that we don't realize that kids that are maybe too talkative, too chatty, have an opinion, that there is a career path for them too, because I always had an opinion as a kid, but no one told me that that opinion could look like this book or my second book or the third book. Nobody told me that it could look like the career in journalism that I ended up having, where I was getting paid to give my opinion every day and write about it. But it was like this natural progression from me writing about stories that I didn't see existing in the world around the HIV epidemic, and then I wanted to cover more topics. And so I started covering more topics and more topics. And then from there, I became a freelance journalist, signed the first book deal, then signed another book deal, then the book got banned, and now I'm here at the Ruby conference. Well, I want to thank everybody for having me here. I never know what kind of room I'm going to be speaking to, so it's always cool to speak to rooms that just want to hear the story, and rooms that have great questions and give great feedback on everything. Really, really grateful to be able to do this in Texas, because because my team gets very nervous anytime something comes up saying they want you in Texas. So thank you for providing a safe space for someone like me. It means the world, especially as I continue to grieve the loss of so many who were just killed in a nightclub. And it's a never-ending vicious cycle of thinking about my safety. And so to come into a room with so many people who are warm and inviting with such wonderful questions, it means the world to me. So thank you.